Welcome to Unpacking Peanuts, the podcast where three cartoonists take an in-depth look at the greatest comic strip of all time, Peanuts by Charles M. Schulz.
Hey everybody, welcome back to the show. We have something special for you today. We are going to do a little re-release of 1950 parts 1 and 2, which was our first foray into this podcasting game. Guys, what do you have to say? If you think back to the late 1960s when we started this podcast, what was it like?
Well, none of us had done this before, and I think we over-prepared.
Yeah.
And we kind of felt we needed to set up what Peanuts was. So there's a lot of information before he even got to doing the first Peanuts strip, sort of the Charles Schulz story, and establish, who our protagonist is.
Right.
And then we got into it. And, we were all amazed that Jimmy could pull off reading it so well. Yeah. That was the one part we weren't sure of. I mean, we thought we'd be nice if we could show the strip and do like a video or something. But it turns out that having Jimmy read it worked out really well.
I intensely did not want to read the strips because I thought the only version of that I'd ever seen was SD's Kefauver when he was like
no, wasn't it? Was the governor?
Oh, it was LaGuardia.
LaGuardia.
It was LaGuardia, right? He was reading it. There was a newspaper strike in New York, and he was reading the comic strips over the radio. And Dick Tracy has Flat Top Cornered. He did a good job, but it wasn't something I wanted to do. But I do it. And now it's kind of fun.
I remember you suggested that maybe I could read it. And I said, okay, great. Write me the script. And you said, are you crazy?
Yeah. So now I just do it. Now it's like first thought, best thought, just wing it.
It's really good.
I love that I have tons of these little skills that only apply in one very specific setting and are non-transferable to anything real.
Yeah. The thing I remember most about recording this very first one is we were still trying to feel each other out in terms of the banter and the back and forth. We didn't quite know when to come in or where the delay was. And that was the big thing that we just kind of had to learn our way into. And I was, hoping that we would find this place where we could joke with each other and all of that. And we're finding our way here in this first episode. And it's kind of cool to look back.
You also did it on Skype, didn't you?
Yeah, well, that's what I was going to say. We have to point out that, like as Michael said, we did not know what we were doing. I had done a podcast, but it was like super amateur, no frills at all. And it was just me talking. We had never recorded anything, with people in various locations. So if Liz hadn't stepped in and said, hey, you guys are clueless, you need me to do this for you, we would just still be in 1950 saying we should do that someday.
That's right. Thank you, Liz. It's really become a part of our lives, and it's
my pleasure.
Like Jimmy says every week, it's his favorite day of the week. It's a wonderful place to be, to know you're going to come together with friends and talk about something you love every week, and I'm so grateful for it.
I am very, very happy to be part of the team.
All right. So with that preamble, here it is before we knew what we were doing, if we know what we're doing now. So sit back and enjoy Unpacking Peanuts 1950. Welcome to the first episode of Unpacking Peanuts, the podcast where we go deep into the world of Charles Schulz and the Peanuts gang. I'm Jimmy Gownley. If you know me from anything, you might know me from my comic books, Amelia Rules, The Dumbest Idea Ever, or 7 Good Reasons Not to Grow Up. And joining me, as always, are my two co-hosts. First, we have the composer behind the band Complicated People, as well as this very podcast, and the cartoonist behind such strips as Tangled River, A Gathering of Spells, and Strange Attractors, Mr. Michael Cohen.
Hello there.
And we also have with us former vice president of Archie Comics, executive producer and writer of Mystery Science Theater 3000, and creator of the Instagram strip Sweetest Beasts, Harold Buchholz.
Hello.
And Harold, how do you feel? Do you feel nervous? Do you feel excited? What are you looking forward to?
I feel excited. Peanuts is something that it's just been such a big part of my life, and
And to be able to unpack it and take a look at it and understand a little bit of what that impact was is, I think, it's going to be super helpful to me. And I think I'm not alone.
So just to give us some background, Michael, why don't you tell us where and who you were when you first discovered this comic strip?
Okay. Well, I was very young. I'm the elder spokesman of the group, by the way, as you'll figure out, because Peanuts debuted almost exactly a month after I was born.
Wow.
And I remember quite distinctly going over to my aunt and uncle's house and playing on the floor with these little plastic toys. And I think I was around 5 or 6. So we'd be talking 1955, 1956. And I remember being on the floor and looking over at their bookcase, seeing this little green volume. And I went over there, and it was just called The Good Old Charlie Brown. That's right. Which I think was maybe the 4th volume from the series. And I was just like totally captivated. They also had Snoopy, which might have been the 3rd or 4th, and Peanuts and More Peanuts. And I remember, I think I just asked if I could have them. Or I stole them. I don't know. But I ended up with those copies and read them like thousands of times. And up through the late 60s, I bought every volume as they came out.
Wow.
So I had quite a big collection of those. But to me, it was just so amazing because I don't even think I was following any newspaper cartoons at the time. It was just a whole new world. And I learned a lot about the world from reading these things. I mean, there was words I didn't know. And there was, Schultz was dealing with some, pretty heavy subject matter. So to me, it was like the best school I ever had.
Right. Harold, how about you?
Well, from a very young age, I was fascinated by the printed word and cartoons. When I was a toddler, my mom caught me on the floor of the house with an upside-down Time magazine, picking at the letters. I was just fascinated with print. And when I was 3, I remember I was reading the Sunday comics section. It was Nancy, and trying to make sense of this strip, and it didn't make sense. And I knew enough that it didn't make sense that I was close enough to making sense of it. But I went to my father and I said, why did this happen? And he's like, oh, you're reading it exactly backwards. I was like in the lower right corner reading. This is before anybody adult had even thought to tell me, here's how you read in order. This is so pre-reading.
Wow.
But I was trying to make sense through comics of a story with the mixture of the picture and the words. And I discovered that I was reading it backwards, and it's something that for some reason is a memory that I have that's so strong of, how comics, tied into my life. And I was drawing my own comics from the age of 3. I was that little bird named Birdie, of course, with a sideways V for a beak. And I had a little turtle who kind of looked like the head of a Pac-Man, pre-Pac-Man, and 2 sticks coming out of the bottom of this little head for legs. And looking at those comics from my earliest years, I still have some. I was struck by the power of emotion in them. As a little kid, I wasn't very articulate, but I felt things very deeply. And I think as adults, we sometimes forget, how much is actually going on inside as you're trying to live your life as a little kid. And this is where Peanuts comes in, because I think by around the age of 7, I began to receive these little Fawcett Crest Peanuts mass market paperbacks, like little 50-cent books. And I was reading large chunks of the strip for the first time. And I think that's when it had the first major impact on me. I think Schultz's world opened up to me, and the depth of feeling in those strips communicated to my soul in ways that no human interaction yet had. So again, it's like comics are kind of pre-experience of anything else. And Peanuts was speaking to me in a way that I had not yet processed as a kid growing up. And so without an irony, I can say that somehow Charlie Brown and Snoopy and Lucy and Linus were more real to me than anybody I knew. Mm-hmm. And that's a strange thing to say, but I think that's true, especially Linus. I connected to and related to Linus like nobody else in my life at that time. And somehow Charles Schultz through Peanuts let me know somebody and be known. Mm-hmm. And that is a very strange thing to say about a little black and white comic strip, line art comic strip. But looking back on it 45 years later, I marvel at the impact that strip had on my life.
Yeah, no, absolutely. For me, I remember it predates almost everything. It really predates almost everything. And I wonder if that's one of the reasons, but when you find this particular strip really, really young, is that why you're drawn to make them yourself? Because it imprints on you so young? For me, what happened was my cousins from Philadelphia would come up to visit our mutual grandmother every Memorial Day. And then every Labor Day, they were big into any holiday they could go to a cemetery and mourn someone. So they would come to visit, but they brought these Peanuts books. And the one that struck me was this thing called What's It All About, Charlie Brown. And I don't know if you guys know this one, but the cover of it is Snoopy's doghouse burning and saying, my books, my pool table, my records, my Van Gogh. And it was half the comic strip and half some sort of bizarre, self-help pop psychology book. And I couldn't read any of that stuff. I mean, I was 3 years old or whatever, but the strips within them, I absolutely loved. And I remember to this day, one in particular, I remember coloring it in the book. I still have the book. I'll post it in the show notes, my actual copy I had, which I believe it's Schroeder, or it's Charlie Brown and Linus, or Charlie Brown and Schroeder, actually, I think it is, because it's in the middle of winter and you can't see who they are because they're wearing hats and it's snowing. And they're like, oh, we should go. There's Snoopy. He looks so cold. We should go and comfort him. And they walk over and they say, be of good cheer, Snoopy. Yes, be of good cheer. And they just walk away and Snoopy has a question mark over his head. And I read that. I'm like, I don't get this at all. But I think when I understand that, I will understand something important about life. And the thing I loved about it was that it always felt as familiar as the kids I played with in my town, and always also a little bit beyond me, a little bit out of reach. And I love that. But the other thing I have to say is I also can't remember a time when Charlie Brown Christmas wasn't in my consciousness, because my other earliest memories would be watching A Charlie Brown Christmas and going out with my dad to cut down our very own Charlie Brown Christmas tree. We'd find the rattiest, weediest looking tree and bring it home. And I'd decorate it with hand-drawn Peanuts ornaments in a Charlie Brown and Snoopy.
Was that the only tree you had?
No, we had a real tree too. No, Mom wasn't going to go for that. Come on, But yeah, so those are my absolute earliest memories. And so I'm really excited about the fact that we're going to get to go on this journey together. We're going to get to talk about it because we all love it. And and obviously, if you're out there listening, you guys love it too, right? So we're taking you back to October 1950. Everybody remembers October 1950, of course. First class postage was just 3 cents. So tell Harold, what do you think? What would it be like for someone like Charles Schulz, who's at this point, he's just about to turn 28.
So how old was he's 28 years old, and
we're just about to. He's living in St. Paul, Minnesota, which is not a place that is all the syndicates, all the people that put the comic strips out into the newspapers of the world are in much larger cities, Chicago, New York.
Right.
So tell us, what would it be like for a guy like that to get this?
So to paint a picture of Charles Schulz, here's this mild-mannered kid who's grown up in St. Paul his whole life. He's taken a correspondence school in art, specifically apparently because it had a good section on cartooning. And he wanted to be a cartoonist. There's something he knew he wanted to do. And here he is in St. Paul. And interestingly, in the Twin Cities, that is where the art instruction schools are. So it's kind of funny that he's taking this and sending this stuff in, even though the actual course with the instructors is in.
Right. And I'm certain that an element of that was his personal shyness. He talked through his life about how shy he felt and how he felt invisible in crowds and stuff like that. I think a cartooning correspondence course is a perfect Charles Schulz solution.
And that, is a relatively new thing. If you were an artist, you usually had to go to a major city and traverse that city and be able to figure that city out and be willing to go into that kind of environment to be an artist. And this is a unique thing where here's somebody, a shot guy, and he's just doing it all out of his apartment above his dad's barbershop. I think.
Right.
That's a different artist than the type of commercial artist that was usually getting work prior to that. They were probably a little more extroverted on average. They had to be in order to do what needed what it took to become it.
Well, yeah, and interestingly, the National Cartoonist Society is an organization of professional cartoonists, and it was known as one of the hard drinkingest, wildest bunches that you could imagine. And this was at a time when a newspaper syndicated cartoonist was a celebrity position, and they would make money hand over fist. Guys like Al Cap and Ham Fisher and all those guys.
Yeah.
So this is a whole different world.
He's aspiring to something in this field that has really big upside. I mean, this is a dream, but he's committed to this dream. And then World War II comes along. He's finished the correspondence course, but he's now in Europe during World War II as this very young kid. I think his mother passes away right around the time of going off to war.
Yeah, well, she says to him as he's leaving, well, Sparky, everyone called him Sparky. And one of the great ironies of his life, or synchronicities of his life, I guess you could say, he was nicknamed after a comic strip character, a horse in the comic strip Barney Google. So she said to him, well, Sparky, I guess it's the last time we'll see each other. And then he went off to war.
That's brutal.
Yes, it is brutal.
And talk about loneliness. I mean, he's obviously, there's this mixture of loneliness and being surrounded by people that he has in World War II. He continues to draw. He's not forgetting his goal, comes back after World War II, and he actually gets a job with the same place.
Which is Art Instruction School is the name of the correspondence course. And I would just say, just tangentially, I don't know if either of you guys have ever seen one of the courses, but my neighbor, I lived in this little tiny town, Gerardville, Pennsylvania, a very creative town. I lived on A Street. Literally, they could not even bother to name it. It's just called a street. Right? But like 3 doors down, the neighbor's daughter took the famous artist course, and I got to see all the binders it's legit. It was really an impressive course. It was all on you. You had to do it.
Right.
But boy, if you did it, I think you would have gotten a legitimate art education.
And he obviously took that extremely seriously, and that he must have been a good student and a very fastidious student for him to come back to them and say, I just graduated from your course a few years ago, and he's going to try to take on a job basically doing the instructor side of what he had taken not too long ago without really a whole lot of experience under his belt, other than he was a very good student. That was probably all they had to go on. So that kind of speaks to who he was. And so he's working locally, trying to find his way into cartooning, which is not easy in St. Paul, Minnesota. But to his credit, I think it kind of speaks to who he was as a person. He's very committed. I think there was a Catholic kids comic, and I think it was based out of St. Paul called Topics, and he was lettering pages at the rate, not per page, but $1.50 an hour. So he was working, I'm guessing, pretty fast and not getting a whole lot of money, but at least he was working in comics. And he sold, I think, a couple of $10 pages of single panel jokes to them as well, some of them featuring little children. So it's kind of the first time he's getting published with the kind of comics that we know him for. And one of the cartoons in those pages shows this girl running a potato sack race, but instead of her jumping in, she's got the sack upside down over her head, and her legs are sticking out below, running at full speed. And it looks like their parents are just standing by trees. And the mom says to the husband, "You sure Judy understood the rules of the sack race?" It's genuinely funny. It's absurd, but it's got those elements of Peanuts that we see later.
Right. Well, and one of the other things that's really it's happening at the same time, or roughly at the same time, is he starts doing newspaper strips for his own local paper, the St. Paul Pioneer Press Gazette, Post Gazette.
It's like, St. Paul Pioneer Press.
Yeah. And now, Michael, have you seen the little folk stuff? Have you ever read those?
I don't know if they've been republished. I do have an issue of the Comics Journal with the huge Schultz interview, and they print some of them. They're actually funny.
They are pretty funny.
They're not Peanuts. They're one panel.
No, but would you recognize it as Schultz art?
Oh, absolutely.
Right. I think so too. I think it's interesting because he's doing this it's essentially a gag strip, but multiple panels. I think he did 2 or 3 different little vignettes in each strip.
And this is weekly.
One picture.
Was the women's section, I think.
Yes, exactly. Right. And he, and at the same time, though, he's submitting these gag strips to major market magazines like the Saturday Evening Post.
And so he has quite a success with that. That's his first national success, is that Saturday Evening Post picks up these single panel cartoons that it's little kids in big big people settings, that they're wearing oversized skis into a comic effect, or a little girl. I think the famous one is a little girl standing in high heels and she's angled at the angle of where her feet are in these giant shoes.
Right. And his first one that he sold was actually, the gag is it's a tiny little kid sitting on a giant lounge chair, but with his feet hanging off, resting on an ottoman in front of it that he obviously didn't need. So as personal of a strip that Peanuts actually eventually became, it's interesting that really, I think one of the reasons it's about kids is because that's the thing that was selling.
Yeah, and consistently. I mean, we don't see anything else he's doing that doesn't have the kid element in it. And he sold like 17 of these single panel cartoons, and the competition to get into the Saturday Evening Post by cartoonists was fierce. It was probably one of the top 5 paying spaces you could sell into, and probably the best paying spaces you could sell into. He sold 17 of these things over a course of 3 years. So, and I think that was kind of a thing at the time where there were certain strips that would start out in a magazine or panels, and they became so much a good seller that the same, like Hazel, I think the maid, was in the magazine cartoons, and then ultimately got pulled out and became its own thing because they kept buying these funny cartoons from the same artist over and over again. People got to know these characters. Right. I think it's like that.
Little Lulu, Henry, all those. There are a couple like that.
And that's fascinating that he was that successful. That is so hard to get even one joke in there, and he got 17 of them.
But what he's not doing is creating characters, which I think is really interesting.
That's right.
So basically what happens to kind of cut to the chase and get to the peanuts of the matter is he asks for a raise from the Pioneer Post Gazette, and they tell him to go take a hike. So he loses his spot in that paper, in his hometown paper. And now if he wants to be a cartoonist, he's going to have to sell it nationwide.
And for some perspective, what he was paid in today's dollars over like a 3-year period post-war, when he really started getting into trying to get published from 1947 to 1950 when Peanuts debuts, he made about $25,000 in today's dollars. Being a guy who had no background out of St. Paul, Minnesota, that's not bad for an aspiring cartoonist.
Yeah, what's the average salary? Like $4,000 or $5,000 a year, probably.
Well, yeah, I'm talking about today's dollars, just to kind of like you adjust.
Oh, I see, adjusted for inflation, right? Yeah.
But for a freelancer who's super young, he's determined, and he's really working hard to get something going. And I believe what he said was all during this time, he's also, not only he's got this job, he's doing art instructor schools, he's getting all these cartoons into the local paper, regular feature. He also has the stuff in Saturday Evening Post, but he's also sending things out to syndicates, to try to get national.
So, to get nationally syndicated. So he decides he's going to take a trip on a train to New York City. He goes to United Feature Syndicate, and he has 2 packs. One pack contains basically little folks, gag strips. Another pack contains daily comic strips, which don't really have still defined characters. He arrives too early at the offices of the syndicate, United Features, so he goes out for breakfast. By the time he comes back, the editors that be have opened the packs and said, hey, if you can do a comic strip and create some definite characters, we would like the strip. And just like that, boom, Charles Schulz is a syndicated cartoonist. But I want to talk for a minute about the things that were beyond Schulz's control. First thing that was imposed upon him that I can think of that he had no control over was the name. The syndicate named it Peanuts.
That seems to be the case. And a lot of people can't even figure out why it was given that name.
I have heard it had to do with the peanut gallery from Howdy Doody.
Possibly. But I met somebody recently who to this day had no idea that Peanuts was actually kind of a term for little kids. It would be like a pet name. Hey, Peanut.
Right.
They didn't associate it with kids in any way, so it was a great mystery.
Right. It never occurred to me that it was associated with kids. It just sort of seemed like it was like a Kleenex. I don't know why it's called that. It just is what it is. But he hated it to his dying day. He hated the name Peanuts. Other things, the fact Peanuts every single day was 4 panels. They were the exact same size, never varied. I talked to us a little bit about why that was a thing.
So apparently one of the things that the editor was looking at when he saw the strip and he saw this new version that was in strip form was he was looking for an angle, I guess, to sell a new strip to these newspapers. It's super competitive to get your strip in the newspaper, and editors are hard to get to switch out one strip for another. And this was at a time when post-war newsprint prices were through the roof because they put caps on newsprint all through World War II as a commodity during the war. And then as soon as they took the prices off of it, it skyrocketed. It went up like 70% from 1945 to 1948. It was starting to go up again in 1950. And the newspaper people were going nuts over this because all of their profits were being eaten away. So this editor decides, hey, let's try to sell a strip that is somehow more efficient, uses less newsprint than anything else. Because, I mean, if you can imagine, it's pretty the same thing 100,000 times every day. If it's smaller and you can still have the entertainment value, supposedly that's a sales point to a cartoon editor. And so that is, it's kind of strange. This utilitarian approach to this strip is kind of an indignity for Schultz. That's the main thing they're selling. It's not Schultz's brilliant work. It's the fact that this thing is tiny and can be reconfigured any which way.
It can be printed vertically. It can be printed horizontally. It can be printed as a square. So that was it. You didn't have InDesign and Photoshop. So that was a big benefit to the editor theoretically. But it only ended up in a handful of papers. I've always heard 7. But the Wikipedia article says 9 and then later says 7. So we're going to have to double check on that.
7. Apparently they've added in New York and Boston, which others accounts say was not initially there when it first debuted.
So, but basically less than 10 papers.
Which is very low for a launch of a paper. Now, to his credit, he got into the number 2 market, Chicago, number 4 market, Washington Post. So he was probably in the metro area, like reaching up to 12.5 million people. So that was like, that's 8% of the U.S. population to start out. Not terrible.
No, it's crazy when you think about what shows like that are considered culturally, huge, Game of Thrones or whatever today get compared to his audience at its peak was something like 300 million people every day.
And 12.5 million is all the people that could be reading.
Right.
So how many actually did? But still, those are, some big cities and some major circulation. So even though not a lot of strips and not a lot of cities, but he wasn't in tiny markets. So he was making decent money to start, even though he had such a low paper count.
Right. So that brings us up to October 1950. One of the things you might not know out there, if you're just coming to Peanuts now, or if you're a millennial or something ridiculous like that. But these really early Peanuts comic strips had never been reprinted in their totality until Fantagraphics started releasing the complete Peanuts volume. So, Michael, can you talk to me a little bit about what it was like the first time you saw these very, very early strips and what it was like when you were reading them from this podcast?
Okay. They reprinted Peanuts and more Peanuts. That probably the first 2 volumes of was it Valentine of the books, which I always considered clearly less brilliant material. It was like, I always thought, well, okay, it took him a year or 2 to get the engine running and figure out who these characters were and establish, his sense of humor. So Peanuts and more Peanuts were, like early Beatles or something, even though occasional flashes of brilliance, but still needed a little work.
So are you reading those? Are those like 1952 or so? Those first?
Well,
books?
I read when I discovered Peanuts in 55, 56. I got all these, and I wasn't too clear on the order, but it was pretty clear that Peanuts was the first one, and more Peanuts was the second one.
Right. And then reprint strips from 52.
Yeah, but they didn't tell you any of that.
So
you just had to guess it. But anyway, I always figured these were okay, a few laughs here and there, but definitely I would not ask someone to start with the first one. And then when the Fantagraphics books came out, of course they're doing it chronologically. So the first volume came out, I had to get it, and discovered that those books that I read thousands of times, those early Peanuts books, were not complete. I didn't realize that.
Right.
And so I'd seen maybe 30, 40% of them. So yeah, I'm reading the Fantagraphics books I was just fascinated with these because, first of all, they were funnier than I remember. And actually, he did have, quite a sharp sense of humor from the beginning. And what was just so interesting to me was that he didn't have the final versions in his head. I mean, the versions we know, had to develop slowly.
Right.
So it's just like you think, okay, this is Charlie Brown, but you realize is this Charlie Brown? I mean, he's got the same name, he looks the same, but he's not quite the same personality.
Right. And I think a lot of that comes out of the fact that he was originally a gag cartoonist and creating character was way, way down, on his list. But all right, I don't want to get too in the weeds. I just want general first impressions. Harold, how about you? Tell me about the first time you saw these particular strips.
Well, as a little kid, they reprinted, I think, just a few of the 1950 strips, particularly the first strip.
Mm-hmm.
And I was disappointed as a kid because there's stuff that goes all this way back. And then I'm like, oh, that's not the Peanuts they know. And, I think my view of it was like, it's crisp. It's very crisp. It's kind of bland,
mm-hmm.
Compared to what I was used to with Peanuts. But again, looking at it as a little bit older, there's something that's so unique in the personality of it. It's kind of stoic, and there's this honor and humility and smallness that Schultz puts in there that I really don't see anywhere else. And to find that in the early strips is really beginning stages of Schultz's run with Peanuts is pretty fascinating.
Yeah, to me, looking at them, I think the one thing I would just say is they look the most 50s to me.
Yeah.
I could sort of see this coming out of the UPA studio. It looks like a cleaner Jules Pfeiffer, maybe like a New Yorker kind of feel. So it doesn't feel Schultz as much as it feels just generally 50s.
Hi, everyone. I just want to take a moment to remind you that all three hosts are cartoonists themselves, and their work is available for sale. You can find links to purchase books by Jimmy, Harold, and Michael on our website. You can also support the show on Patreon or buy us a mud pie. Check out the store link on unpackingpeanuts.com.
We're going to start now. Just go through the strips, and I want to get everybody's general impression. I think the first one's famous. We read it in our introduction.
October 2nd. Shermie and Patty are sitting on some steps. Charlie Brown approaches, a smile on his face. Shermie says, "Well, here comes old Charlie Brown." "Good old Charlie Brown. Yes, sir. Good old Charlie Brown. How I hate him."
Good old Charlie Brown, how I hate him. I think this is amazing because it introduces two gigantic themes of Peanuts. In the very first strip, the cruelty of children, which goes on forever in Peanuts, and the fact that Charlie Brown is kind of despised by his so-called friends.
Yeah, it's really a striking first strip, given the look of it. It's just not what you'd expect. It's got the bluntness of this childlike duplicity. Kids are not saints, and that's definitely a unique take on children, I think, in pop culture at that time.
It's brutal. It's a brutal joke.
Yeah, it's a brutal joke. And it seems to point out to me how little he knew his characters, though. Because Shermie, who is fairly a bland character, and eventually pretty much gets written out of the whole strip because he is
I'm wearing a Shermie button as we speak right now. So,
Shermie solidarity.
R.I.P. Shermie.
Yeah, okay. He's not somebody who'd hate anybody.
I don't think there are characters at all at this point. I think they're
it's a joke.
Interchangeable. Yeah.
And the idea is that he's not going to be living with these characters for the next 50 years. It seems like a one-off. And you'd think if you were making any kind of story or continuity strip, if we've set up that this guy hates Charlie Brown, then throughout the next weeks, we're going to just
see that. Be how
does he hate him? Why does he hate him?
Instead, though, we cut away. The only thing we know for sure in day one is that he wanted a character named Charlie Brown.
Right. Let's do an Unpacking October 2nd podcast, because this is really interesting. You'd think right from the beginning that this strip, because Charlie Brown's the only one named here, good old Charlie Brown, almost sounds like a catchphrase right away.
Right.
You'd think that would be the name of the strip.
Right.
But then he doesn't show up again for a week.
Right. Right.
And that's interesting. And did he want to call it Good Old Charlie Brown at that early point?
He wanted to call it Little Folks, but somebody else already owned Little Folks. And by all Little Folks, anyone who's out there seen Parks and Rec, Little Sebastian.
Yeah, I mean, it's so funny because, I mean, Schultz has this dignity to him, and Peanuts is horrible, but Little Folks
is not any better.
To the modern ear, it seems like that's the thing that could have been imposed on him by the syndicate.
Oh, absolutely.
This is the thing that he would have chosen for his own strip, but of course he did, and that's what he called the St. Paul version of this thing.
Someone, I guess, in the 30s already had done a Little Folks strip, and they said to the syndicate, "No, we might do something with Sunday." And the syndicate president, I guess it was Larry Ruttman, said it's Peanuts.
Well, and interestingly, United Feature Syndicate, which picked this up, one of their probably top 3 strips at the time was Lil Abner.
Right.
So this was already derivative.
Right.
And why Schultz was so insistent on something like that has always been a mystery to me. But there's something that it seems like he absorbed the nature of what was popular in comic strips. And because that was part of the zeitgeist, that he was just trying to insert himself there in some way that he thought had some dignity.
Right. Yeah. Within, again, all these massive limitations put on him by the syndicate. He had to have it in 4 panels. It was going to be reproduced tiny. He had to have characters rather than just gag-a-day stuff without characters. He had to call it a certain thing. It's unbelievable the amount of limitations he has, and he just launches into it. Clearly, this is Tolkien-esque. I think is that I'm just gonna start and figure it out.
October 3rd. Patty is walking down the street smiling. She sings to herself, "Little girls are made of sugar and spice and everything nice." Then she punches a little boy right in the eye and says to herself, just as happy, "That's what little girls are made of."
Because we get to day 2 and Charlie Brown's nowhere to be seen. And here we have Patty slugging a guy in the eye. 1950.
Right.
At this point, Peanuts is pretty much punk rock.
Yeah.
It's bizarre also the fact that he doesn't name the other characters for a while.
Right.
I mean, that's the first thing you got to do is say, "Hi, Patty." But no, he goes, because I wrote this down, October 26th, Patty gets named.
October 26th. So we're almost a month into the strip.
Wow. Yeah, Snoopy gets named November 10th.
Wow.
Shermy doesn't get named till December 18th.
Huh.
You know, his first
It takes a while to come up with the name Shermy. I mean, that's a solid name.
Yeah. So really, it's all very puzzling. So is it maybe possible that these were printed out of order than the way he intended?
No, because he actually numbers them. If you look at the Fantagraphics books, they're numbered by hand by him.
Really?
Yeah, not by date, but by strip number.
And they look like they are indeed in order. That the syndicate didn't bother shifting.
Well, why would they? Because there's no characters at all. Like, I mean, he's really trying to figure out not just, he's just trying to figure out the form. He had never done a strip.
Yeah, this was before. Now, I don't know. Again, we don't know. Maybe there's something historically that maybe he had made 12 submissions.
Mm-hmm.
The adventure strip. I mean, I've never heard about that, but it sounds like he was trying to submit stuff up until now. This was not the first idea that he's.
It's not the first idea, but I wonder if it's the first he showed.
They actually sent out to syndicate.
Yeah.
Maybe, because that's 3 years, and he so wanted to be syndicated. Maybe he was biding his time. I don't know.
Yeah, I'm not sure either. But so but here we are on day 2. We have no characters, we have no names except Charlie Brown, but we do have 3 great themes. We have an aggressive female, we have everybody's Charlie Brown, and we have these kids are cruel. So he knew why.
Too,
and what was that?
Self-deluded. I mean, she's swapping this Charmy in the
and saying, right?
We don't know if it's Charmy. Is it Charmy? Is it Charlie Brown? We can't exactly tell who this character is that she's hitting.
Maybe he's never seen again. Maybe she kills them. Maybe it's a really dark beginning to me.
Yeah, that would be. But yeah, just the fact that she's saying little girls are made of sugar and spice, everything nice. That's what little girls are made of. And then in the middle of that, she's hitting this kid in the eye.
In the eye, and he's wounded. He has a black eye.
He instantly has a black eye. Yeah. So this was.
So we know he didn't know how he was going to talk about it. He didn't know who he was going to use as his mouthpiece, but he knew what he wanted to talk about.
Yeah.
Because then we got
Patty actually does. I mean, right away, this is sort of consistent with her personality.
Right.
She's pretty mean.
Right. One thing interesting, just along the lines of talking about Patty is, as you read the first few months, it could easily become, Peanuts could become a romantic comedy about Shermie and Patty with Charlie Brown as a third wheel.
Yeah.
It could easily have gone that way.
Did not.
Yeah, thankfully. But the next day, we have one of the great days probably in world culture. We have the first appearance of a little dog that eventually becomes Snoopy. What do we think about the gag, guys?
Cute. It's all cute.
Right.
And that's all he was going for here. It's not particularly funny. I'm going to be keeping an eye on Snoopy because he mutates rather quickly into the Snoopy we know. I think in 2 years it'll be very recognizably Snoopy, and I'm trying to follow what I think is Schultz's mental process.
Yeah, that's huge. That's huge. I mean, and just for the people who don't have the strip in front of them, the number 3 strip is Snoopy walking along happily on a sidewalk and has this very tall flower that we don't know how or why there's this flower sticking through his collar
which for years I thought was coming out of the top of his head.
I did too. And now I see that
joke.
very clearly tucks it into if you're looking into that little collar thing. And I hadn't noticed that either. So somebody must have put it in there in this non-surreal world of Snoopy. Someone put it in, but Snoopy's happy that he has this flower.
Right.
And then Patty is up inside a house right outside the sidewalk watering her flowers, and then she waters Snoopy's flower, which then makes it wilt and fall onto the ground, and Snoopy's unhappy.
And that's the whole gag. And one thing I would like to say, if you're listening out there and you want to follow along, you don't have to buy the Fantagraphics books, although I highly encourage them because they're beautiful and they have fantastic introductions, and Fantagraphics should be rewarded for, putting those books out. They're remarkable. But they're also on gocomics.com. You can read all of Peanuts. And they're also now doing a version called Peanuts Begins, which has these strips, but in color. And if you're a purist, I'm sure you're probably screaming into the void, but I got to tell you, they look really nice in color. So anyway, so you can find them for free at gocomics.com.
Yeah, another thing with the little Snoopy comic here is, this is Schultz showing kind of his sensitive side with the small little moment, and talking about how others can inadvertently ruin your joy. Patty doesn't mean to be pouring water and ruining Snoopy's day, but she did.
Right.
And that seems to be another theme of Schultz that's already getting set up.
It's amazing to watch.
It's a unique voice. It really is.
But Snoopy is still recognizably a dog, even though dogs don't have little question marks coming out of their heads. But
but you would see that
pretty much dog-like.
Right.
October 5th. A disconsolate Patty is walking in the rain. She says to herself, "Rain, rain, rain, rain."
In panel 2, Shermie is walking towards Patty, holding an umbrella.
The next panel, Patty is walking away, but now she is holding that same umbrella. Panel 4, Shermie is now the disconsolate one and says to himself, "Rain, rain, rain, rain." October 6th. Patty is watering a flower in a flower pot as Snoopy sniffs it. Over the course of 3 panels, it grows several feet.
The 2 days later, Snoopy, there's probably the first surreal element in the strip where Patty is again watering a flower and Snoopy's smelling it, he's loving it, but it grows so fast, it grows out of smelling range, and Snoopy can't smell the flower anymore because it's now like 3 feet high.
Yeah, we're looking at these. The day before is just simply kids saying the word rain, 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 and crossing each other, and Patty steals Shermie's umbrella, and he says rain, rain, rain. It is the most minimalist thing.
And we don't know.
Did he get once again that she's evil.
Well, did she take it, or did Shermie give it out of obligation to her?
No, she took it.
But that's a masterful use of the art of cartooning, right? Because you guys can have the conversation that happens between the panels, and then follow that up the next day with this bizarre flower thing. He's into long flowers. He thought that might be his thing.
That was something for Schultz.
October 7th. Charlie Brown and Shermie are standing under a sign that reads, "Watch out for children." They look to their left, they look to their right, and then walk away with Charlie Brown saying, Let's leave. I don't think any are coming.
And then the next day, I think, is the first strip where I actually laughed out loud. It's two kids standing under sign. The sign says, "Watch out for children." And then Shermie says to Charlie Brown in the last panel, "I don't think they're coming."
October 18th. Shermie is sitting at a little child's lemonade-style stand. Only he's selling root beer. And he has a sign on the front that reads, "Root beer for sale." In panel 2, we see Charlie Brown behind a similar booth, only his says, "Flowers for sale." In panel 3, we see Patty at her booth, and it says, "Lemonade for sale." And in panel 4, we see Snoopy, and his booth says, "Bones for sale."
This is the first one that I think could conceivably be a slightly later Peanuts, maybe. This gag would have worked,
That could work at any point in the series.
Well, I think I was looking for the first sign that Snoopy is not just a dog. So I was thinking, okay, well, he's sitting there smiling. So clearly a dog wouldn't do that. But then again, they could have. They made the booth and they sat him down and he's sitting.
Right.
So if they say sit and he sits there, then that.
Or it's a Calvin and Hobbes style thing, and Snoopy maybe.
You can take it anywhere you want because, it looks like whoever made these booths, they were all made by the same person. Who was it?
Right.
And mystery.
To me, this is actually a daring strip to end this little thing with it. It's him standing up for smallness and gentleness. And I mean, one of the terms that always struck with me, it's such a strange term. He said, "I wanted to prove that there was a market for innocence."
Mm-hmm.
And this strip kind of embodies that, but with an intelligence behind it. Again, I don't know anybody else who would have done this gag in 1950, even though it's not this psychological strip or about angst, but he's just taking advantage of this incredibly cute dog design he's created, and that he doesn't mind adding little hints of surrealism in the strip. It's just a norm for him from the very beginning.
And I promise you all now that we have now given Bones for Sale more thought than Charles Schultz ever did.
October 23rd. Shermie and Patty are playing a game of checkers. Patty looks happy and says, "Yes, sir, this is a real game of skill." In panel 2, Shermie looks contemplative. In panel 3, he smiles. He's found a good checkers move. "Ha," he says. In panel 4, Patty tips over the board in frustration and says, "Luck, luck, luck. It's all a matter of luck."
I think we have a little checkers game between Patty and Shermie, and this is something that ends up getting recycled years later. In a checkers match between, I think, it's a marbles game between Charlie Brown and Lucy. That's another thing that I think would be interesting to talk about right now. We're talking about 4 characters, 2 of which are not famous quintessential Peanuts characters. Linus is years away. Lucy is years away. Schroeder doesn't happen yet. It's amazing how many of the elements that we think of as classic Peanuts just are not in these strips.
Yes. But one element, he always had a younger kid.
Yes.
Slightly younger, and in this case, when he started, it was Charlie Brown.
Charlie Brown. I never thought of it that way, but you're right. Yeah, that's really interesting. And I wonder what he was getting out of that. If it was just the fact that there was a power struggle he could play off, there would be, kids who are clearly superior, and he could have a little guy. But Charlie Brown is not shown as like the loser all the time. He's also kind of can be a wise guy at times. He could be a romantic rival for Shermie.
He comes out on top,
Right, yeah, several times, yeah.
October 30th. Shermie and Patty present Charlie Brown with an empty plate. Shermie happily says, "Happy birthday, Charlie Brown." Charlie Brown replies, "Well." In panel 2, he looks at the empty plate. "Don't I get to blow out any candles?" In panel 3, Patty replies, "We don't know how old you are, so we left them off." Charlie Brown asks, "Where's the cake?" In panel 4, Shermie answers, "We weren't even sure it was your birthday, so we didn't bring one."
October 30th is a non-gag, and I think it's one of the best ones where they give Charlie Brown an empty plate for his birthday because
they weren't sure if it even was his birthday.
Why do you call that a non-gag? That baffles me.
I guess what I mean by a non-gag, I don't mean it as a pejorative. I mean it as kind of like the absolute minimalist reduction of what would qualify. Because I don't think it's a guffawable gag, but I still think it's one of the funniest.
Okay, well, in general, I don't think he's guffawable gags. I do think his stuff is very minimal. And
I guess what I'm saying is sometimes the more minimal it goes, the more I like it. Because I do think there are interesting timing things that he does in Peanuts, because it's 4 panels, that he places sometimes the joke not in the last panel. He gets to the point where he'll place the joke in the second or third panel.
Yes.
And then there's a reaction joke or something later. And I think it's really interesting. And that's something I never saw in any other strip. And I want to, if Michael's talking about tracking Snoopy, that's one of the things I kind of want to track.
It's funny because, I mean,
the strip. Yeah, the reaction panel. The reaction's in the last panel.
Yeah.
Reacting to the joke in the third panel.
Right, exactly. Right, which I don't know. Is that something we're talking possibly in something like Skippy? What about would that happen when you're reading Nancy backwards? Was that something they were doing in Nancy?
I don't know.
No.
My theory on that, by the way, is that Nancy is actually funnier if you read it backwards.
and that's why some people, I guess, it's the perfect comic strip.
Any which way,
and it's just as entertaining. I like that. That's pretty good.
November 7th.
Charlie Brown is disciplining Snoopy. Charlie Brown says, "You don't seem to realize that I'm the boss in this house. What I say goes, see?" We hear a voice from off-panel. "Charlie! Charlie Brown!" Charlie Brown walks away sheepishly. "Excuse me, I think that's my mother." Snoopy smiles.
Going to November 7th, there are all kinds of Peanuts sins. When you think of Peanuts, I think you think, there's definitely no adults. And Charlie Brown is always called Charlie Brown. But right there, November 7th, we have an off-screen adult voice, and he's just called Charlie.
And then Charlie
Brown after that, yeah. But that seems so wrong. At one point in a Charlie Brown Christmas, Lucy says, "Look, Charlie," and every time that happens, it's just such a wrong note to me.
Really?
Yeah, just who calls him Charlie?
This is actually one of my Snoopy seems to understand English jokes, because he is smiling at kind of the irony here.
Yeah, you could definitely assume that Snoopy knows more than you expect the dog to. The other thing is Snoopy's. This is the one time where the drawing is inconsistent. Snoopy's huge in the first panel, and then he shrinks.
That's amazing. You're right.
Schultz is usually so good about that. That's the thing that struck.
Actually, and the head shape's even a little different. That's interesting. Very, very interesting.
November 9th. Charlie Brown and Patty are talking. Charlie Brown says, "The future frightens me." Patty replies, "I don't see why. You're young and full of life." Patty continues, "You'll probably live for another 60 years. Charlie Brown says, "That's what frightens me."
What do we think about November 9th, Michael?
I think this is a brilliant... I mean, that's just like none other character would say that line. I mean, this is clearly a Charlie Brown line.
Right.
But this proto Charlie Brown doesn't seem that depressed and paranoid and neurotic. So I think Schultz is starting to get a handle on the character.
Yeah, to me, this is the one that he could redraw in 1965, he could redraw in 1975, he could redraw in 1990, and it would always feel like Peanuts.
Yeah. It's kind of this post-war insecurity we have not seen.
Right.
This type of pop culture.
And I think there's a lot to be saying about that, him defining or whether defining that zeitgeist or catching that zeitgeist. But Peanuts in the 50s, this version of Peanuts in the 50s just start clicking and going together.
Yeah, it really is remarkable how Schultz does line up with what's going on, and he kind of leads the way in so many different ways in pop culture. Things we hadn't seen before. I mean, he represents this shift from the urban to the suburban,
Right.
And all of these early strips were drawn by guys in the city, and they're showing the city. Now this is kind of a different world. And
so Harold, that was going to be one of my points. Do you confirm it? I think this might be the first suburban kid strip.
That's the way I look at it. It's either the rural or urban, and then this. Yeah, I would say that would there might be an exception, but in terms of the popular strips, this is reflecting all of these people who are moving. The GIs are back, and their baby boom's just about to start. This is a perfect time. Baby boom starts 5 years early. We had these little tiny kids in 1950. He's just right on a major movement. What's going on in the United States?
Yeah, and it's true. It may have been even the type of thing that some of these young parents were reading this strip to the kids when the kids were very young. And then the kids seeing themselves as the parents sharing it with the kid. And then the kids began to identify with these characters because clearly the baby boom and Gen X too identified with these characters.
Right.
In a huge way.
And I've always been kind of baffled about different people looking at Peanuts and saying, well, these are little kids saying adult things. I never as a kid saw that. I just said, these are little kids saying the things that I'm thinking that nobody else is saying.
Right. Schultz, the one thing I did a comic book for those that called Amelia Rules for years and ran for 8 volumes. And the one thing I kept trying to always remember is that there's really no blurring between the kid world and the adult world. A kid lives in the adult world and an adult impacts the kid world. And Peanuts is that. It understood that kids had real thoughts and real fears that were no less valid or no less deep and profound than any adult thing. In some ways more, because the kid wasn't worried about a bill or whether they had a new car. It's an existential fear or worry that a kid has. And the fact that he gave voice to that in 1950, it's mind-blowing.
Well, part of it, I think the suburban setting is important in this case too, because if these were out on a farm, they'd be working all day.
Right.
Milking the cows. And if they're in the city, they'd be running with a bunch of kids and playing practical jokes. But they sit on the sidewalk and there's nothing to do. That's why they watch so much TV. There's just nothing to do out in the suburbs.
Right. It's really interesting to look at it.
And there's no imminent threats to them like you might find.
They have the luxury to be angsty like Charlie Brown.
Yeah, everything becomes smaller and more intimate. Their experiences are smaller, but their feelings are no less.
Right. Well, think about this. I mean, my dad grew up, let's say 15 years previous to this. When he was Charlie Brown's age, he was working in a coal mine.
Yeah.
That's
mind-boggling.
No, let's say when he was Charlie, like 8. But when he was 8, yes, absolutely. Yeah. 8. A breaker boy.
Yeah, that changes everything in terms of, the experience that people are bringing to reading these strips.
Right.
The child is revered in this baby boom era. And the child, we're finding a whole focus on children around this time because that's what people are doing.
There's so many people Dr. Spock
and it's in these new settings that have all the edges have been taken off.
November 13th. Patty and Snoopy open the door to see Charlie Brown. He's arrived and is wearing a winter coat. Patty says, "Well, Charlie Brown, come on in." This is a surprise. Just hang your coat anywhere and come into the living room. How have you been? The two friends walk away and we see Charlie Brown has hung his coat on Snoopy's snout.
Hey, November 13th, Snoopy looks like he lives with Patty. It is not. When is it established that Snoopy is Charlie Brown's dog? I think it does happen.
Year.
Well,
not this year.
Charlie Brown is scolding Snoopy in that panel we just talked about. Is the first time it hinted that it could be him because he's in Charlie Brown's house.
Right, but the next time we see something that could imply ownership,
there's Patty with Snoopy. It's like Snoopy is. It's like Charles Schultz maybe has not decided.
Right. Is it Patty's dog? Is it a neighborhood dog? I don't know. But I love Charlie Brown in a sports coat. I think that is just a snazzy look. And a point for the people doing Peanuts Begins in color, because it actually does make it slightly funnier. Seeing his beautiful, nice sport coat. It's a tan. It's a camel.
That's no hair.
And Patty's being a decent human being in this one.
Right.
Yeah.
Which is also interesting because Schultz, you could just say maybe he doesn't know the characters, or maybe he's trying to go for something a little deeper. Daisy May is always Daisy May, right?
Well, that's the thing. I mean, most strips, I would think most funny strips sort of paste 1 or 2 personality traits on each character.
Right.
So this is the guy who eats hamburgers and blah, blah, blah. and is always, borrowing money. Schultz didn't do that. So that's when you're talking about Linus. I think Linus is the most complicated character in Western literature.
I think you're right.
Because you cannot describe him in any short way.
But you're always aware that it's Linus.
Yeah. And
No
so
one else is
Patty has other sides. She's not just the grumpy, the nasty one.
Right. And that's like a major breakthrough.
All people have goodness and badness baked into them.
Right.
And he's not asking you to type them and the judge prejudge them. That's an interesting aspect of they just are.
Right.
And I don't know how he does that, except maybe he does mix up the different angles of them and he doesn't segue in. It's like, here's Charlie Brown being belligerent. Here's Charlie Brown being shy. Here's, insecure, confident.
Right. And it's amazing because it makes it a real person.
Yeah.
November 14th, 3 wordless panels of Shermie and Charlie Brown sitting at the curb. They look dejected. In panel 4, Shermie says, "Yep, well, that's the way it goes."
That is a minimal non-gag. That's a non-gag.
This was a bold little move for Schultz to have.
Yeah, brilliant.
Absolutely. And to know that you already have so little real estate in people's time, in the paper, and to go that small is really bold.
Yeah.
Gotta love it.
Well, it wouldn't be funny if he explained what happened.
No.
There's no way.
In the first panel, we lost the ball game, or anything.
Right. Yeah, but you know what? Interestingly, I could see just a month earlier him doing that, having the first panels be, we lost the ball game, 2 panels of silence. That's just the way it goes.
Yeah, and he definitely messes around with timing this early.
Yes.
In a strip. No, had this been done before? Had he ever seen this done before? Maybe not.
You know what? It's interesting that you talk about. It works purely because it's a comic strip.
No, you're right. It's a pure comic strip.
Yeah.
This joke only lives the comic strip world.
Yeah.
Okay, but let's keep an eye on this. This is what they call a wallpaper strip.
Yeah.
Where did that start? Was that common in comic strips? Wallpaper strip, as I believe it, is where the first several panels are exactly the same.
Right.
You can photocopy them.
Right. Purely for timing. And it's a strength of comics because you can't in a film cut into the same moment. Mm-hmm. So this is essentially 3 identical pictures of Shermie and Charlie Brown sitting on a curb. But because it's in 3 separate panels, it's 3 separate moments. You couldn't do that in a movie.
No. It would just look wrong.
It would just look totally wrong. Or unnoticeable.
Action.
Right. Right.
How long would they have to run that for that to work? And then people would be...
And it would still be one long moment. It wouldn't be 3 individual moments.
And people would still go, what just happened?
What just happened?
Was that supposed to... They wouldn't even ask themselves was that supposed to be funny. They'd just be puzzled.
Right.
What just happened?
Right. Exactly.
November 25th. Charlie Brown is speaking with Snoopy. They both look sad. Charlie Brown says, "So long, old pal. I'm going to miss you." Charlie Brown continues, "But don't be sad. Try to keep your chin up. It won't be for long." In panel 4, we see Charlie Brown tucked into his bed. "In fact," he says, "I'll see you in the morning."
I would talk about the November 25th strip since we're talking non-gags.
Well, I want to ask a
something
Snoopy question. Michael, did you have any notes on the 15th of November for Snoopy's development?
Yes, he's definitely understanding.
And that's maybe the first time we could say for sure Schultz is suggesting he
understands
know
English.
Exactly what he's saying.
Yeah, that's really, really interesting. And, and already though, right in that panel, you could see that Snoopy. It's still radically off model compared to the famous Snoopy, but I would be able to identify that as Snoopy.
Yeah. Yeah. It's a good point.
But he's definitely Charlie Brown's dog here.
Yes. Oh, absolutely. When you draw Charlie Brown, if you were going to sit and draw Charlie Brown as he famously appears, let's say from 1965 onward or whatever, you can look, his nose and his eyes are almost connected. They're so close together in the center of his face. It's like the secret to making him look like Charlie Brown. If you look at these early ones, there's a football field between his eyes,
which was something you were taught in drawing school is you want to make someone look young.
Mm-hmm.
So the wide set eyes was one of those things to do.
Right.
Although interestingly, They also say make the eyes lower set
Lower.
on the head, and he doesn't do that.
Right.
So it's a strange mixture of, an adult and a childlike feel to them.
Which is the strip too. It's amazing to me how fractal Peanuts is. You can look at that first strip and extrapolate so much of the later stuff from it, and it's strange that you see that again and again. That he really knew his themes and he knew what he wanted to talk about so early on.
Yeah, so much of him is in the strip from the very beginning.
From the very beginning, yeah.
Yeah, this is what I would call a non-joke.
This is a non-joke. So I wanted to ask you guys, is this a meta commentary? Like, I'll see you tomorrow, meaning the comic strip will be here tomorrow?
No.
It's just him saying goodnight to Snoopy.
Well, he's saying I'll see you in the morning, and he's in morning and evening paper, so I would think he would not. That's not a meta.
So it's literally just him saying goodnight to Snoopy. That's the entire strip.
But Snoopy's really sad about it.
Yeah. There's no joke, though. There's literally no attempt at humor.
I would love to try to get inside Schultz's mind and say, why did you do this?
I loved it. I love it.
It adds this. It's like all it does to me is it adds importance to the relationship between Snoopy and Charlie Brown. That Charlie Brown would choose to have this conversation with the dog. Mm-hmm. That the little dog said simply because he's going to bed and he won't see it.
Right.
And that's important.
Right.
Because that's all I can get out of this otherwise.
But the other strange thing about it is there's a location shift because it's just Charlie Brown and Snoopy in the void, the Peanuts void where there's no background at all, talking to each other. And then in the last panel, Charlie Brown suddenly tucked in his bedroom, in bed.
Right, in his pajamas.
In his pajamas, still talking to Snoopy.
I guess the only gag here is maybe what he was thinking was he's saying, "So long, old pal, I'm going to miss you" in the first panel. And so you don't read anything else here. The assumption she's going away. That's got to be the gag, right? That Schultz was thinking, I'm going to set this thing up where it looks like there's a really sad goodbye. It's interesting.
Well, it's really interesting though because he's has this spare style, but he's still experimenting within it. But some of these panels, it's unbelievable how stark they are, no background whatsoever. And then some of the others where he'll put a little more detail in.
Yeah, he says Skippy was. By Percy Crosby was an influence of his. It's such a forgotten strip today. And I think it's just because it hasn't been out there. People haven't been able to see it. But what people have said about it is remarkable. It's like this forgotten piece of cartoon history that influenced Schultz. And often Crosby would not have a lot of background element. Or just from a little I've seen, Schultz will often have a panel, even with a background, that don't go all the way to the edges of the panels.
Right.
And I think that was something that he might have been influenced by Percy Crosby, because Percy's style was much looser than Schultz's, mm-hmm. but it focused you in on the characters, and the background became super minimalistic, and it's almost like it's designed to make you not take it all in.
Right, and I believe that, very impressionistic. I do believe also is where Schultz got the idea of the kids sitting on the curb,
yes,
which later becomes in the strip famously the kids philosophizing at the stone wall.
Yeah, and the fact that the very first strip has them sitting on the curb, that's like an instant. I mean, I think Skippy had ended in 1945 and had run for like 20-some years, mm-hmm. and there was no more. And mm-hmm. so he was kind of picking up the mantle.
Right. I definitely think there's an element of that to it. Oh, and then I like the fact that Patty is a comic book fan.
Of course.
A few times they mentioned Patty's a comic book fan. So she's like the cartoonist. She's a manic pixie dream girl for cartoonists. She's cute, she's mean, and she likes comic books. Oh, well, how about December 21st?
Oh, we're all the way up there.
Jeez. Yeah, and what happens on December 21st? We have the first appearance of the jagged striped T-shirt.
Didn't even notice that. And I read this like 4 times in the last month. I didn't even notice that.
That's a biggie.
Yeah, and it works. It instantly works.
Yeah, it's a wonderful little graphic touch.
And do you think
all the roundness of Charlie Brown to have those little jaggies?
Right. Yeah, that's true. And this is not my observation. I think it came from maybe the David Michaelis biography or maybe somewhere else. Maybe Gary Gross said it. Do you think it's an influence of Crazy Cat? Crazy Cat's one of the strips that Schultz absolutely adored, considered one of the greatest strips of all time. And the jagged stripe was a theme that, or a motif rather, that Harriman used throughout that strip. I wonder if there's a little
He was such a student of strips.
I wouldn't put it past him.
Even if it was subconscious, that was something that he saw a lot.
Because again with the idea of picking up the mantle, because I don't think he just wanted to be a cartoonist. I think from the minute he started, this was what he was going to. He was going to be great.
He was aspiring to something much, much higher.
Right.
Okay. So I'm looking to see if the zigzag shirt is consistent from here on. He's wearing a jacket because it's cool.
Pretty much is. Yeah. It's like once he's committed here, he doesn't go back.
And it's so amazing that even without focusing on the details, just seeing that little bit of black, it instantly reads as Charlie Brown. What is the verdict, Michael? Is it consistent throughout?
Yeah, except he's wearing a coat.
He wears a coat. Yeah, exactly. So and then so we wrap it up on the 30th. There was no Sunday strip, and that is Peanuts 1950, a very short one because it was only a few months. But guys, I want just your general impressions. Michael, why don't you start?
Good gags. I mean, I couldn't come up with any of these. I'd say pretty consistently good. I mean, the punches are there.
Mm-hmm.
The last panel punch almost every time.
Mm-hmm.
And I could see where this would become a popular strip. Even if it stayed this way, it wouldn't be like epic.
Right.
But it would certainly be better than Nancy.
At this early stage, maybe going even to 53 or whatever, it would have like Barnaby style cult following. Yeah. People would think of it as better than average, highbrow, great example of the craft.
Which is amazing when you think about, okay, so we're saying that intellectuals might have made this a darling,
mm-hmm.
when he's doing something in probably the most accessible in terms of character and structure and simplicity, and that very well may be true. I mean, we know that there was no merchandise that's built around this for a while. These very minimalist characters to all of a sudden kind of worm their way into people's hearts and minds. I mean,
and the characters that did the worming, most of them haven't even appeared yet.
Right. Yeah. We just don't know them well enough to identify with them. To me, what I feel all the way through here is Schultz.
Mm-hmm.
I just feel this strong sense of this unique voice behind it, but the characters themselves are not yet fully embodying them in ways that, like, I know Charlie Brown, I know Shermie, I know Patty.
Well,
even I know Snoopy. I probably feel like I know the best at this moment.
Spoiler alert for episode, whatever it will be, the last episode of 2000. I think that's where Schultz ends up. I think he ends up being. I see the last year of Peanuts as just Schultz too. Okay. What are you thinking about? What are your goals from this podcast? From participating in this podcast, Michael? What are you looking forward to the most?
I'm curious. Is 1951 going to be Snoopy's first thoughts? And who's born next?
Yeah, it's just fascinating to hear what you guys are saying about the strip and your unique perspectives on something that we're seeing forming before our eyes, and that grew into something that had such a massive impact on the culture. And just to see how we weave in, we weave in our own experiences with this strip and how it might resonate with other people who are listening.
Yeah, for me, the thing that I really got out of just reading these first strips was I just like being in this world again. It's one of my first memories of something that I was just head over heels in love with, just a fan of it. And I love it. And these early ones, so many of them are still newish to me and so fresh. Some of them I've only read once or twice in my life.
Yeah.
The later ones I may have read 100 times or more. But I love that. And I'm just looking forward to the fact that I get to, visit with Charles Schultz every day while we're doing this podcast. And now for the big finale, we are each going to pick our favorite strip of 1950. And then you will go to our social media, which will be at the end of the podcast, and vote for who is right, who has the best Peanuts strip for 1950. Harold, you start. What is your pick?
Okay, I don't know if this will be a very popular one, but of all of the strips, I had a hard time picking one that really, really did jump out at me. But I decided to go with a Snoopy strip that is entirely visual. Snoopy is surprised by a little jack-in-the-box that pops up, and then the second panel, he gets this mischievous look on his face, And next thing you know, Shermie's coming up to the closed Jack in the Box, and Snoopy pops out in the final panel. Again, it's one of those things where as a gag, it's not the normal way I think someone would tell a strip. That this feels like Charles Schulz to me, but it also feels like Schulz leading up to Peanuts. It feels like the Little Folks things that he was doing, the Saturday Evening Post strip that he was doing. And it's a simple vignette. It's beautifully told. Snoopy's desire to surprise in this classic, early, iconic, cute smile of him just popping up out of the thing. So he's mischievous, but at the same time, he's guileless when he actually pops up out of the thing. And I just find it extremely endearing, and it is an aspect of Schulz that is easy to get lost. That I was kind of talking about. It's kind of the art of the cute, this kind of world of innocence mixed in with all of these deeper thoughts and themes that Schulz did with such integrity. And this is just a classic little version of it where he unapologetically is just telling this simple little vignette with these characters. And it's just darn cute.
It is. Michael, what is your pick?
Well, first of all, Harold's totally wrong.
I wasn't going to say right.
Fair enough.
So I got to go with that November 9th, The Future Frightens Me strip.
Yeah.
And just because, to me, the brilliance of Peanuts is not a reflection on the cuteness and adorability of kids. It's on how horrible human beings they are and how horrible life is for them. And this is really the first time we see it in full flower.
Yeah, I would have picked that one too. That's was in contention for me. But since you picked it, I'm going to cop out. I'm going to go with the first one, How I Hate Him.
Well, that's a smart choice. I think people are voting.
Yes.
I think that he may win this round.
Guys, this was so much fun. Everybody out there, I really, really thank you for listening to us. I hope you join us again next week. I'm Jimmy Gallenly for Harold Buchholz and Michael Cohen. Be good. We'll see you next time.
Unpacking Peanuts is copyright Jimmy Gownley, Michael Cohen, and Harold Buchholz. Produced by Liz Sumner. Music by Michael Cohen. Have a wonderful day, and thanks for listening.
You blockhead.